5 at O'Hare, next news 8:30, and Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
This hourly segment is brought to you by Papa Nicholas Coffee. Papa Nicholas, great coffee, period.
This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. We're going to talk to David Harsanyi from the Federalist at the bottom of the hour on the Ukraine, Biden, Trump impeachment imbroglio. I mentioned in the last hour about this, reminding people of that time that, a year ago, back in May of 2018, when three senators, Democrats named Durbin, Menendez, and Leahy, sent a letter to the the prosecutor general in Ukraine, pressuring their compliance with the Mueller investigation, asking questions that they answered, pressuring them. So you remember that time. I don't know if they're supposed to be impeached as well. And then there was the other time, like a month ago, when Senator Chris Murphy, who's a Democrat from Connecticut, used U.S. aid as a carrot and stick with Ukraine's new president, Zelensky, saying basically, if he acquiesced to requests by Giuliani to investigate past corruption and allegations involving Americans, including Biden, then Ukraine would no longer enjoy bipartisan support for U.S. aid.
Oh, really? Talk about pressure.
And that's domestic politics, I believe, as well.
Yeah. And President Zelensky, because he's at New York at the UN, by the way, meeting with Trump today, so that's going to be a huge photo op. I thought they could relive the phone call, and forget the transcripts. Let's just do it.
Do a little
live.
Theater in the round.
Yeah, that would be perfect. But he told an Israeli journalist, he said, I have never been pressured by President Trump, ever.
Okay, well, it's impeachment or bust, or impeachment and then bust. We'll see. We'll talk to Harsanyi about that at the bottom of the hour. Now, we want to address something that perhaps may be visiting certain locales around the country. It's a structural issue. But I would suggest that there are
some cracks in the foundation.
Well, there are places that are more vulnerable than others. Places like Connecticut, like New Jersey, like Illinois, more vulnerable to others when the question asked is, when's the next housing crisis? This a couple of months ago, James Freeman raised the specter of this, and so I thought, well, why don't we do a stop, look, and listen, since we haven't learned a lot of the lessons we should have from the 2008 Great Recession, driven in part by that collapse in housing. Maybe we should take stock of where we're at more than a decade later if we're not exposing ourselves to those same dire consequences. For more on this, we're pleased to be joined again by Bethany McLean, who's written extensively on the topic. She's a contributing editor for Vanity Fair. Bethany, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
So one of the things that Freeman wrote about in the Journal a couple months back was the specter of the ghost of mortgage markets past, these no-income, no-asset loans being made available again. Now, they're not guaranteed by Fannie and Freddie, so that's different, and they're only available for non-owner-occupied investment properties. So it's not quite the same, but it certainly raises the specter of some of the same moral hazards that, in part at least, led to the bubble bursting a decade ago.
Yeah, it does, and it's a funny thing because one rule generally is that history rhymes but doesn't repeat, right? So the idea that we would have another housing crisis when that was the thing that brought down the economy a decade ago seems completely far-fetched because it's not supposed to happen again. But I am hearing tales from people on the front lines, lenders, mortgage brokers, of these riskier loans making a comeback indeed. And you wonder, heading into an election year with political pressure to keep the economy roaring, and given the importance of housing to our economy, it makes up some 20% of the economy, what we might see happen. And you already have pretty I'm tempted to use the word inflated, but I'm going to say instead there's been a dramatic rise in housing prices in a number of major markets, right? I mean, the markets came back in a rip-roaring kind of way. So, yeah, I worry. I've generally been told that lending standards are much better this time around than they were a decade ago, but there's anecdotal evidence that something is shifting.
And what are the most vulnerable cities?
I think it's hard to know. I mean, Chicago, the home prices have gone up dramatically. New York, there are already some rumblings in the market. Prices are falling. There was an interesting piece in the New York Times that 25% of condos that have been built are not occupied, haven't sold. But it's hard to say because so much is economically driven, right? And if the economy in a certain area keeps exploding, then so will the housing prices. So you can't go on just the fact that prices have gone up dramatically.
Although there was a report out earlier this week that home prices are rising at the slowest pace in 7 years, so some of that's slowing down. And in particular, I wonder if local and state tax and regulatory policy it will be impactful, such that if and when the next crisis does come, it will strike not like a tidal wave, but more like a tornado, will touch down in different areas. I mean, in Illinois, like New Jersey, where we compete for the highest property taxes in the nation, you're having the value of your home eaten away by property taxes, your equity eaten away by property taxes. And, there is a glut in the market, particularly as you go up that price point in Chicagoland.
Yes, there absolutely is. And given the fiscal condition of the city and the state, property taxes aren't going to get better anytime soon. I think they can actually only go in one direction. So that's going to be an issue for all of us in Illinois. What I actually worry about more is that the Federal Reserve, which really, for better or worse, came to the salvation of the system a decade ago by dramatically lowering interest rates and spurring the economy all over the globe. Central banks are out of ammunition because we've had very low to even negative interest rates for the last decade. And you heard what happened when Jerome Powell, the Fed chairman, tried to start raising rates last year, and the markets just basically freaked out. And so we're in this unprecedented experiment in terms of these super low interest rates. And the question has been, how does the Fed unwind that? But the other question is, if something does happen, if there is an economic shock, we've run out of the type of medicine that has historically been most useful. And so that's a little bit frightening too.
Are we remaking the same mistakes that were made in the lead up to 2008 with our reliance on Fannie and Freddie as the backstop?
Well, we never fixed Fannie and Freddie, right? So when they were taken over by the government and put into conservatorship, the idea was that this would be temporary. And in fact, that word was used. And we were supposed to figure out how to reform the housing finance system so that it made more sense for a modern economy. And instead, we did nothing. Over a decade later, Fannie and Freddie are still in conservatorship. And so, yes, taxpayers are on the hook for everything, because our government did nothing to fix the problem and put the two companies on sound footing. It's a really complicated question, how best to fix them, but it just got bogged down in politics, not surprisingly, and so here we are. And what I've always worried about is there's an argument from both the left and the right that having Fannie and Freddie as wards of the government works perfectly well. Why bother to shift it? But of course, that's worked well in good times when markets have been going up. But when times are bad, it means that the cost of that lands on taxpayers. And the other problem I've always worried about is that they are wards of the government, which means the government can put pressure on them to guarantee riskier mortgages because they're supported by the government. And I don't think it's healthy.
She is Bethany McLean, contributing editor to Vanity Fair. Bethany, thanks as always for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Bye.
And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper. Hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
My name is David